Over the decades, there has been a generational war, especially among whites, between baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. The younger generation blame the boomers for all the economic problems, the conservative laws, the feelings like they're just closed-minded, spoiled, and selfish. And the data seems to show that's true, based on their continued majority voting record for pro-corporate Republicans, and this massive disaster that was nothing more than a complete temper tantrum by a group of people losing privilege and beginning to get the same rights as everyone else finally. However, there is a small minority population in this large demographic of white boomers who gets ignored and sidelined thanks to the fact that they have to get grouped into this population, which means they had to put up with crap we never had to. Today we'll focus on them. 45% of boomers of all colors have been voting Democrat for the past 3 decades, including people who voted against Donald Trump because they don't feel like we couldn't elect a woman and a TV host with a failed business who lies to your face and cheated on all of his wives and molested women would have been a better candidate. So today we salute the boomers who fought against the current thinking of their generational peers and laid the path for values we Gen Xers and millennials hold dear and many times take for granted. This is for the female minority boomers, who tediously and thanklessly stood up to the powers that be, and tried and failed or succeeded in the face of prejudice to overcome injustice, who never gave up even when it felt hopeless, and faced harassment or even possible death threats or lynching if they wouldn't shut up. This is to the white and male boomers, who did sit-ins and bus boycotts, who fought and marched against injustice along with the women and minorities, when it was just as easy to ignore it or give in to hate, who used their privilege to change things and acknowledged it without white guilt. To the boomers who fought for women's equality when women were just expected to stay home and find a man. To the boomers who tried and failed to increase income equality for all. This one is for the boomers who held a tiny candle of skepticism in science in the dark until the internet came along to let it become a blazing fire. These are the boomers that didn't go from hippies to the religious right yuppies just because they had kids. To the people who paved the way for the acceptance of atheism as a valid idea and protected it when it was akin to Satanism and communism. This is for the boomer nerd. I remember what it was like being an obsessed geek fanboy who loved computers, comic books, fantasy, and sci-fi, and how isolated I felt until my late 20s when the internet connected me to people just like me. This is for those boomers who had to keep their passions hidden, who only had Star Trek as your only representation in mainstream TV, and had few people to talk with about it. For the boomers that helped shape generations, who now has its own cultures, meetups, conventions, cosplayers, and makers. We as Gen Xers and millennials salute you. We get so irritated with your generation's closed-mindedness, but you spent your entire life dealing with it with no escape from it, having to remain silent often for fear of losing your job, starting an unnecessary fight, or just being treated like a turd at the bottom of someone's shoe. You didn't use bullying with people you disagreed with, like so many of your generation. You instead used reason and discussion. Without you, our generation's values would have not been cultivated to what they are now. And for that, we thank you, and hope you get to enjoy some of the benefits that you work so hard for, and our generation just now expects.